Hello, this is an assessment of a Broadwood grand piano, 5 foot long, made in 1916. So assessing it for a client who'd like us to improve it. So let's have a look at it first of all cosmetically. And generally the colour is good, it's pretty integral. If this is obviously maybe been down sometimes and up sometimes, otherwise the colour tends to be much darker there if it's been up most of the time, and the colour generally is quite integral. It's a bit rough here, it feels very rough, but the colour hasn't faded too much, it's just faded slightly. There's a slight blemish here and there, so we could certainly improve that while it's with us. So the client was particularly wanting the mechanics of the piano and the acoustics to be restored. On the top lid here there is evidence of water damage. Again, that could be improved rather than repolish the whole piano, and certainly the colour is reasonable. If it was our piano that we were reselling, we may possibly want to repolish it. You can see there is a fade line there. Interesting enough, it looks worse in the camera than it does actually live, but the camera's picked it up very well. So slight difference of colouring, but again nothing disastrous. We can try and improve patches like that. There's a little bit of veneer missing on the music stand, so all those things can certainly be improved. The name John Broadwood here is boxwood inlay. It's really beautiful. Other firms use boxwood inlay from time to time. You can see the marks made by the fingernails here, and the keep tops are excellent ivory keys. They're almost perfect, and they are quite shiny. Normally we say buff the keys, but it's not too necessary in this case, though we could obviously do it while it's with us. There's a slight chip on one of the ivory keys, and certainly we can disguise that. The team is pretty good at disguising that, and so you can hardly tell it's been chipped in the first place. The piano does have a particular issue, and that was the thing the client was talking about, the tuning, and also the tuning pins are a little bit jumpy. I've marked some of them here, and if you listen to it, they're clicky and jumpy. It makes tuning really annoying and quite difficult, and if they're really jumpy you can hardly tune it. It's just possible, but as you can hear when I'm pushing the tuning lever, it clicks into position, so that certainly is very uncomfortable for the tuning. And there's another one here. I marked some of them, but I think probably all of them are jumpy. I just marked a few that I found, and they were certainly jumpy. Let's try one I haven't marked at all, see if it's jumpy. Yes, you can hear it. It's not quite as bad as the other one. Let's try this one. That's pretty smooth actually, so let's say maybe 50%, maybe more, are jumpy. The bass ones aren't quite so bad, but the bass ones, some of them are very large, and actually the middle ones are large too. So what we'd have to do here, you can actually take the pins out, just clean out the holes and then put ligger pins in. The problem is that these are already quite big, some of them, and so I think the only option really, if you want to get rid of that, is to replace the rest plank under here. So obviously then you can put smaller pins in, and that will cure the problem. And also that's very useful for modern heating, because you can put a rest plank that's cured to match modern heating, and also the rest plank that is multi-layered, so that's very useful too. Delignate rest planks is what we probably would use for that. So if we go underneath now, inside the piano, we can see the rest plank. That's what the tuning pins go into. There's the wood that they go into there. It could be that someone's put liquid in the rest plank, and that can cause jumpiness. A pin tight was an example of something that did tend to cause jumpiness, and wasn't that good at tightening pins either. Some people use super glue. I'm not sure if that causes jumpiness or not in the long run. If you're in the trade and would like to comment, we don't use any liquids. We either put bigger pins in or we've replaced the rest plank. So replacing this rest plank, for some reason or other's got jumpy. Maybe it got jumpy without any liquid being put into it, but certainly obviously Broadwood's a good maker of piano, so not really sure what the reason for them going jumpy is, but replacing the rest plank is the obvious answer. The soundboard is in good condition without any cracks in it. When we take the strings off, we obviously will tidy up the soundboard, recondition it, refinish it. Any shims will get filled, but I don't know if there's any need for that on this one. I usually find out the soundboard's dried out over the years and there's got cracks in it, but this one hasn't. And the tuning pins, we said, was the main issue here. We're obviously going to change the bearing cloth and everything when we redo the whole piano, if that's what the client would like us to. And I think that's really the advice that I would give. This part of the frame looks quite good, but there are there's bits of the frame showing damage, so that frame can be refinished too. Over here I think was the main area that you could see that it's got quite damaged, maybe from tuning pins hitting it, sorry, tuning levers, or maybe even hammers. I don't know what's caused that damage. It's quite extensive there, isn't it? Generally the frame isn't so bad. It could be restrung without the soundboard being refinished in this case, and without the frame being refinished. That would obviously be less expensive, though we'd normally do everything once everything's apart. Now, listening to the strings, interestingly, usually it's extremely good tone on the Broadwood, and it's a shame to have to change the original strings. Let's listen to it. And round here it's a little bit weak sounding, and maybe we can think about increasing downbearing on the bridge, and that sometimes works to improve, if you improve the downbearing, the tone then of the notes here crosses the soundboard much better. Downbearing is obviously the pressure on the soundboard, and if you put too much on, that's not good. Too little, some negative downbearing can actually be on an original negative downbearing. That's not very common. We're talking about the downbearing as the bridge bearing down on the soundboard, and then the sound is transferred run to one side and the other, and that gives the strength of tone. But here it's quite reasonable. I've detuned that one when I'll have to retune it before I play it. And that bass is good here, but the tenor is a bit dull, and if you're not restringing the whole piano, you can actually turn the strings. You take the string off the hitch pin there, turn it one turn in the direction of the winding, and that will improve the tone of these. But if you're going to restring anyway, they might as well change all the strings, obviously. By the way, the serial number on this style of Broadwood is invariably here. That's under the bass string there. Unusual perhaps, well, Broadwood always do that, but other makes don't do that. So if you're wondering where the serial number is, that's where you find it. I want to take the opportunity of mentioning that the front rail on Broadwoods tends to have lots of screws in it. Other English makes do the same, Challen and Chapel and so on. For some reason they've all got into the habit of putting lots of screws here, but you don't really need them. Most makes, and this one included, like Bechstein, you don't have lots of screws along the front rail, you just have this to hold the front rail on, and that's sufficient. And this front rail's also got dowling on it, so with that goes into the holes. You don't need the screws at all, and the screws are just, you can see the screw hole there. So if you're in the trade and the screws are missing, it's quite common, because piano tuners take the screws out and say, well, we don't really need this, and so don't put it back in, and I totally agree with them. So as well as the dowling, which goes in that large hole, there's also screws going here. So sorry to go on about this, but it's an opportunity to mention that if you are a piano tuner and you lose these screws, I wouldn't worry about it. They're not really functioning at all, as far as I know. If you're in the trade, you might like to comment. While we're talking about that, Broadwood also have screws in the cheeks here, and that's a shame, because Bechstein, for instance, if they haven't been changed, they'll have a wing nut, and it's much better, because in the trade you don't have to bother with a screwdriver at all. Now, the piano's got a beautifully made Schroeder action. You can see there, it's just Schroeder there. It's one of the main action makers. Renner and Schroeder, two extremely common action makers in Europe. And the hammers are hardly worn, which is good. So the mechanical side of it here, the action is good already. It certainly needs regulating. They have the Bechstein style screws here, which you turn these screws to increase the spring tension. That's wonderful. They don't have the Steinway style, which is much more difficult to regulate. There, if you're doing lots of Steinways, you get used to it. So if I want to increase the spring tension, I turn this screw downwards like that, and then the spring will be more tense. So if we now watch the hammer, it jumps up very fast. There we go. And jumps up very fast after it. I'm just releasing my finger on the key a bit to make the back check release. So I've just released the tension again, and if you watch the hammer, goes upwards but not too fast. You want it to go upward very positively. That's probably not quite enough, so I'm going to just put a bit more tension on it. It should go up very positively, but not so that you feel it in your finger. So that's a lot more positive now, and you can't feel it in your finger, but it's jumping up positively. So the main issue on this piano is the jumpy tuning pins, and apparently they're going out of tune quickly as well. So replacing the wrestplank, we have to do that, unfortunately. And then we recondition the soundboard, refinish it or refinish the frame. There's various options, so we have to think about what's the right thing to do there. Recapping the bridge, we'll have to think about that too, whether that's going to improve the tone in the centre, try and get a bit more down bearing. Repinning and restringing then. When the new bass strings are going to sound better than the ones that we've got here, I'm sure they're going to be much more sort of boomy and much more pleasant to listen to. And regulating the action, there's regulation to do. The key dip is a bit on the high side, 11 to 11.5. I quite like a lot of key dip personally, but keyboards tend to be 11 very often, or 11.5. Pianos, this should be perhaps 10.5 to 11 rather than that. You can feel the difference. So the key dip is the distance the key goes down. This is an 11 millimeter measure, and it's slightly more than 11 there, and it's varied. Some parts it's 11.5. I personally like 11 millimeters, but 10.5 is the normal really for most pianos. They do vary a bit from piano to piano. And the key weighting isn't that high really, 61 in the bass, perhaps bring it slightly down. When we lubricate the balance rail and the rollers too, the rollers will make, there's a bit of a squeak on some notes, so that will help with that. And the initial inertia is less than, and you tends to bring the key weighting down. So 50 is fine in the middle there, 40, so generally is not too bad. Quite light at the top, so we could obviously regulate that so it was even throughout. It doesn't feel bad at all. It's quite pleasant to play, and in fact the action is generally a beautifully designed action. So that's a Broadwood grand piano, 5 foot long, made in 1916. Very pleasant to play. The action is a beautiful feel to it. Obviously regulation will make it even better. We're aiming to make it so that when you play really quietly, you can rely on all the notes coming out. So you can play really softly, and you can rely on each note sounding as you push it down. And it's not far off that already, so just a little bit of regulation make it very slightly more sensitive. I find it very inspiring to play. It's a pity that Broadwood hasn't maintained that sense in the public that it is a very high quality piano, as good as any German piano. This age of Broadwood particularly, Broadwoods do vary an awful lot, so this age of Broadwood up to 1916, really round about early 1900, early 1900s, is probably the best age. Some of them are what we call barless grands, which means that there are no bars. The bars on the frame you can see going from front to back, there doesn't have any of them. It's barless, and I believe they're made of steel and not cast iron, and they're very beautiful pianos, very beautiful sounding, and this is a similar age really. So really recommend the Broadwood grand pianos, and don't turn your nose up at them or turn them down because they're not German. I really do recommend them. Beautifully designed. So a bit tubby round here. So you can turn the strings. If you're not going to replace the strings, you can turn them, and it does give a little bit more life to them. It's beautiful to play actually. The action is already beautiful. Very easy to play. Thank you very much for listening. If you have a piano you'd like us to assess it, then please do write to info@robertspianos.com, and we'll assess it and try and decide with you what works is more important than another work, whether you want to do the case, if you want the touch. Obviously we all want the touch to feel like a new piano, which is what we're aiming to do, and this can certainly feel like a new piano. Thank you very much for listening.